Hello everyone and welcome back to another Fate video. Today, I want to make people mad. At its core, Fate is a game that's main draw is its characters. However, it's a hard sell to get anybody to spend money on a JPEG unless it's a part of a pyramid scheme. So, in order to alleviate that, they had to implement some form of gameplay as well. So, we're now going to take a look at the 10 worst units in FGO in my opinion. This is not a criticism on their art design or their personality, so when I say certain servants are bad and should not be used, if you're a fan of theirs, then you already know that they are bad in gameplay. For the record, this list will be taking into consideration the buffs that they have received in JP, and all skills and noble phantasms will be at 10, 10, 10, and 5 NP. So, without further ado, let's get started. Number 10 is Matahari. The best of the worst. Personally, I love Matahari. She's adorable and really fun to make work. She holds a nice niche thanks to her recent buffs that make her a viable cheap support unit. She is a star generation skill that evolves into a 100% party-wide star generation and a 50% crit damage buff, which is actually pretty nuts. This skill, once upgraded, makes her a force to be reckoned with. However, the rest of her kit is just not great. She has a charm and a defense down. The charm only works on males, but the defense down is universal, which is nice. Her third skill is mediocre at its best. It's a skill seal for one enemy, and also reduces their defense. Her NP is an AoE debuff that can charm and reduce the attack and defense by 40% at its best. So, the name of the game for Matahari is debuff, debuff, debuff. Here are the issues and why she is on this list. She is a 1-star unit with 1-star stats, and worst of all, absolutely no passive. That's right, she is the only unit in the game without a passive ability. While this does not break her as a unit, it certainly is a blemish against her. Her biggest issue is that she dies incredibly quickly, and as the game progresses, her usefulness drops off pretty fast, as many of the later game bosses have debuff immunity built into their design. This completely nullifies her niche, and I've done a lot of playtesting with her, and it's just not great. In terms of waifu, though, EX tier. Number 9, we have Mephistopheles. He also received a buff not too long ago that helps him out. He is good for one very specific place in FGO, challenge quests. His claim to fame is his 3x buff block. This is an insane ability in challenging content and nullifies some challenge quest boss gimmicks pretty well. However, that's really the only thing he's got going for him. His Innocent Monster skill did upgrade, which was nice, now giving him an additional 30% attack for 3 turns. The reduced healing is once again only viable for challenge quests. His Witchcraft skill follows suit for this as well, as delaying a boss's NP is pretty substantial. He also sports an upgraded AoE NP that is a buster. He is very good for his one role and not great for anything else. If he had an NP gauge skill set he could easily farm, I would put him as an honorable mention, but because I'm not playing with what ifs right now, he will remain in number 9. Number 8 is Saber Jill's Duray. He is an example of an interesting idea for a servant, but done with terrible execution. Jill's gimmick is that he has a permanent 40% buster damage up and an NP that boosts his attack by a further 40%, and also creates stars with overcharge. The catch is this. His NP drops his defense by 50%, and he can't buster Brave Chain. He has an NP damage upgrade, which he, built as a DPS, cannot use. He has an NP gain skill, which will buff his attack, but also kill his defense. If he spams his NP, he can be one-shot by almost any archer or berserker in the game. He is built to be a solo unit, but his NP makes that impossible. Now, you can make him work for sure. Super whale setups with Merlin and Konyaskaya can make him shine through, but unless you love the guy, there is really no reason to do that. Just use Caesar or Bedivere or even Fergus. But because he is still a workable DPS and is able to give team support, I'm going to save him from being put any lower on this list. Number 7 is Geronimo. This is another character that I really like, and I am so sad to see how they handled him. His entire skill kit is just projection. They all buff the card damage by 50% for a single turn. He has a single quick card, so there is no reason to buff this skill at all. The arts buff is actually pretty decent and chains well with his NP, which is honestly pretty good. It's an AoE arts NP that heals the party, damages enemies, and reduces their crit rate. Pretty good all things considered. But that's all he has going for him. If ever there was a servant that I hope gets a full rework, it is him. Or have his abilities be targetable with an additional effect. He has the potential. It's just a shame that they never touched him outside of an NP upgrade. Send help please. Number 6 is Benkei. He actually has some practical uses. In fact, I used my level 25 Benkei as a part of my team to beat Argent Altar at the end of Lost Belt 4. This is because he is able to provide a taunt. Taunt as an ability is incredibly valuable, and even if the unit using it dies, at least you're able to keep your more squishy allies alive. This alone makes him useful, at least a little bit. Also, his buff in JP adds removal to his NP, and also increases the curse damage. It is a shame that the stun only has an 80% chance to proc at its best, but after this it's all bad for Benkei. He has no damage, his other skills are incredibly niche, being a skill seal and an NP seal respectively. His NP gain is awful as well, so you won't get much mileage out of it, but he's very fun to make work and he can still be used in some contexts. Number 5 is Samson. This is another character that is one buff away from being good. His shtick is that he kills Maeve. That's pretty much it. He has a 60% extra damage buff against evil enemies, which is admittedly real good. Plus, it lasts for 3 turns on a 5-turn cooldown, meaning that it's going to be up for most of the battle. Solid. He has a 3000 HP heal that also has a debuff removal on a 5-turn cooldown, which is targetable. Solid. His third skill is where we hit the wall. Samson is somewhat comparable to one of my favorite characters, Izo. However, Izo is superior for one big reason. Izo slays humanoids, and Samson slays humans. Here is a list of human enemies in the game. It's primarily human-like enemies that you will farm in the story and in events, with a few Lost Belt boss fight servants thrown in there as well, meaning that his NP, which is designed for mass damage to a boss enemy, gets nothing out of this skill. It does not help that he is a low-star assassin, so his damage is lackluster as well. That said though, he is a workable servant, and you can use him as a pseudo-support with his heal. Plus, his first skill does do wonders if you're fighting an evil enemy. Number 4, we're starting to get into the real stinkers. We have Caster Gilles de Rais. His most recent buff makes him somewhat viable as a pseudo-support. He has 2 skills, because his first skill is worthless. An NP damage reduction that also decreases Buster and Arch defense, all by 20%, and a terror skill that will stun an enemy at random in the time frame of 1 to 5 turns. These 2 skills are pretty good, but that's it. His NP does no damage, and neither does he, and his NP gain is abysmal. So, you would literally be using him just for the 2 skills. Realistically, it's hard to justify bringing him at all, but at least he can do something that the rest of the team can benefit from. Number 3, we have Jekyll and Hyde. This character is awful in the game. As an assassin, he is worthless. He does no damage, and his skills do not fit him at all. His one saving grace is that when he flips to Mr. Hyde, he can actually do some significant DPS. Plus, when this happens, his skills gain additional abilities. The problem? He has no Noble Phantasm, and he becomes as fragile as a hollow glass bowling ball. The damage output that comes from being a Berserker is not worth using, when there are other units that do the exact same job with no setup. The whole point of using a budget Berserker is to have an easy beat stick to stomp the early game. To make Jekyll work, you have to start the game with a max limit broken K-scope or build an entire team around him. At that point, you almost certainly have better options. Just use Spartacus or Lu Bu if you want a cheap Berserker. Alright, number 2 is Angry Mango. I refuse to say this man's name properly. This is one of the most difficult characters to obtain, being exclusive to the friend point gacha, and it is not justified in the slightest. He is a 0-star Avenger, and honestly, it shows. His skill set is an NP gauge down that also reduces attack, a 50% crit rate reduction for 3 turns, and his final skill is a scaling quick buff that will kill him after 5 turns. It also now gives him Guts. This can go up to 200% quick damage, so if you time this just right, you can do some serious damage. His NP puts him into a stasis, where he will then multiply the damage taken by the health lost and his buffs, and then deal unavoidable damage to all enemies. That all sounds pretty alright on paper, but here's the main problem with Mr. Mango. He's an Avenger, so he rarely has class advantage, and because of his rarity, he does abysmal damage. He has a 1-up in that he has a niche, albeit an incredibly niche. His Bonsi E gives him double damage against beast class enemies, as well as a Guts. This will almost never show up and makes him somewhat of a dead unit. He's at the very least unique and very, very fun to make work, but for practicality purposes, he's just awful. Number 1, and to the surprise of probably no one, is Phantom of the Opera. Phantom suffers from every single issue I have listed for every other set of servants here. He has a dead skill in his third skill. His first skill is Innocent Monster, which decreases his defense and doesn't make enough stars to justify use. And finally, he does have a charm that has a 90% chance to hit and removes buffs, but is for one enemy and on a 6-turn cooldown. He has an Arts NP that doesn't fit the rest of his deck, as he has 3 quick, 1 art, 1 buster. So his deck is confused, his skills are confused, his NP does no damage and takes forever to get. The only useful thing that he has in his kit is the buff removal. Outside of that, there is no reason to use him. I always point to this as my prime example of how awful Phantom is as a unit. In Shinjuku, they made him a berserker, because then the fight would actually be a challenge. They wanted to give him screen time so bad, but realized that he was just awful, so they wrote him as a berserker. It is the most blatant example of knowing a character is bad, but doing nothing with him. I apologize to the 8 Phantom fans out there. I'm not sorry. But that's it. Let me know what you thought in the comments. Leave a like as it really does help out the channel. Subscribe to catch these as they go up. Follow my Twitch for significantly less structured content. I also have a Twitter. But for now, keep your chin up. Peace.